The Pastor's Heart, and it is late on Easter Day, and Dominic Steele here. What extraordinary times we live in that on Easter Day we're taking time to have this conversation about how does church funding work in the era of COVID-19. I'm speaking today with James Flavin and Raj Gupta, both from Sydney, both finance gurus. And look, just to note, this particular episode of The Pastor's Heart is directed at Australian pastors. If you're one of our many overseas listeners, look, honestly, you may just want to pass this episode by. If you're an Australian church leader, though, we're going to do our best to serve you the next couple of minutes. Before we come to James and Raj, a little note about the Pastor's Heart. It's our aim to serve church leaders, to encourage church leaders in our task of seeking the lost and building up the saints, but we want to grow this ministry further. But before we can do that, we need a little help to pay our small team in this. And so if you're able to help us out by going to patreon.com/thepastor'sheart and becoming a supporter at, I don't know, $5 a month or something, then that would be great. Now, our guests, James Flavin is the former chair of the Sydney Anglican Church's Finance Committee, and he's the current chair of the Sydney Anglican Superannuation Fund, and he serves as the a director at Wayside Chapel, a finance director at Wayside Chapel in Sydney. And Raj Gupta, friend of the Pastor's Heart, many-time guest, and former accountant, former church treasurer, and now with the Centre for Ministry Development, as well as being senior minister at Toongabbie Anglican Church. Raj, let's start with you. COVID-19 and the Pastor's Heart, it does feel like a pruning process, but what's God been doing on your heart and on the heart of other ministers these last few weeks?
Yeah, look, we could have a whole episode on that one, Dominic, and talk about it for some time. I think my observation, one of the great encouragements has just been to see so many people across our church step up. So many people off their own bat start to care for people, or continue care for people, or ramp that up in all kind of ways. We have been forced, through change being thrust upon us, to almost overnight do things in a whole bunch of new ways. And I think, the most visible aspect of that is the online world, but it just goes on and on and on and on to see the myriad of ways in which people are now using their skills in the midst of some stress and coming into a whole world of physical isolation and trying to help grow disciples of the Lord Jesus and reach new people. It's really quite exciting and quite challenging and quite stressful all at once.
James, the work of God on your heart in this season?
Oh, this has been a very difficult one, Dominic. There's my family was overseas when most of this hit Australia, so we flew back into the 14-day quarantine. And we've got a comfortable arrangement. So we had the 14 days at home before others did. My wife and I have a great relationship, and it was hard for us. So for other folk who are isolated, who aren't as comfortable, whose relationship isn't as good, we need to be looking after our families in this. There's going to be lots of families and lots of pain, and this is a time when the church can really step up and encourage love.
Mm-hmm. How big is the impact of COVID-19 likely to be on Australian churches? Let's start with you, Raj.
Look, I think it's going to be pretty big, and I think it may be helpful to split it up into short term and then thinking more medium term and long term. And, the fundamentals of our economy are in the process of changing significantly. We have seen almost overnight the tourism industry grind to a halt. I was going for a walk yesterday, was able to get a coffee from somewhere, talking with a friend, with a restaurant owner. Small businesses, those in hospitality, it's just been changed overnight. And it's not like it's all going to click back all of a sudden on the other side of it. These things are going to change significantly. Business owners of whatever nature, their businesses models have just changed quite literally. And so we need not just to be thinking about the short term, but also on the other side of it, it's going to take a long time for things to come back. If they're going to come back, I think it's more likely the economy is going to be in quite a different place for many, many, many years to come. The impact of that has to have an impact on churches. both the financial model and also how we serve and minister to people. Now, exactly what that is, I think, look, I lost my crystal ball a few weeks ago, so we don't really know. But there's going to be an impact.
What about initially the impact on churches around Sydney? I've heard stories of some losing 70% revenue, some 50%, some 40%. What's the word on the street that you're hearing? Well, again, let's go first to you, Raj,
Look,
then James.
There's an impact. I mean, by definition, for 4 or so weeks now, churches have not been able to meet, like many other businesses, I think it's worth saying. Some churches are heavily dependent on electronic giving, and so at this stage, the impact of that is far less. The more a church is relying on electronic giving. Other churches, I talked to someone at a major church in Sydney. He said to me 50% of their giving comes in form of cash. So they haven't met for 4 weeks. So there's going to be there already is a huge impact. Now, as a generalisation, many small churches rely more so on cash, and larger churches rely more so on electronic giving. But electronic giving then is impacted in larger churches, perhaps when there's more people who own businesses, and their businesses, even though they might want to keep giving, they're just not able to. So there's a huge impact. I think it's reasonable. A church can, I would have thought, can expect between 15% and 50% of its revenue is going to fall in the short term.
James, what are you hearing about drops in revenue from various churches?
All the same stuff that Raj has just said. I've had a number of treasurers and wardens contact me in the last couple of weeks with questions like, how do I do a cash flow? What I've noted, just to add on to Raj's comment, is the geographic difference. So folks in St George and around Botany, where there's a lot of airline and airport employees, have been hit hard right now. So I think, look where your people normally work, and that'll be where the impact is fastest. If your church is full of people who are in the media and the arts, they're going to be hit. Those in hospitality are going to be hit. But those in banking, for example, probably have a bit more time. And Raj's point is correct. This is just slicing the world into fortnight slices. This fortnight we're okay. Let's see what next fortnight looks like.
Let's talk about what funding is available for different churches, and there's different layers to look at. There's local, and then there's state, and then there's national. The big one is obviously the JobKeeper and the national one, but let's start local first with James. What are you hearing about local funding availabilities?
Thank you, Dominic. The local government ones are very much on helping to resolve the problems locally. So City of Sydney, for example, have community services grants if you'll be feeding people and helping vulnerable people in the range of 2,000 to 5,000. There's a community services grant from Sydney Council. That's 5,000 to 50,000. Every council has something. So have a look at your local government website. Speak to your mayor. See what opportunities are there. And these are things where the church can do something to make the problem less awful.
What about state funding, Raj? What have you heard there?
There's a few things in the pipeline. Like, this is happening so quickly that there's still a bit of uncertainty around a lot of things. So the state government has announced up to $10,000 for small businesses to help with immediate essential kind of things. They haven't announced the details of that yet, Dominic, so I'm not entirely clear at this point in time if churches will fall in under that. They've announced, I heard of another program the other day about trying to help with isolation to seniors. So there's a new grant program that's come up just overnight that I would like to think churches would be ideally positioned to try to do something about. That is, help seniors who are isolated become more connected. So they're offering between $10,000 and I think it might be up to $100,000. and are after innovation and creativity. Applications have to be in a couple of weeks, so it's just worth continuing to watch the space, as James talked about, because there's new things every couple of days as needs become known, and either local, state or federal governments try to do something about it. I wonder if I could just say, Dominic, before we come to the federal, I at CMD keep talking to lots and lots of people who can be reluctant to apply for government funding. And I just think it's worth saying, from the government point of view, churches are on the forefront of serving our communities. And it's this time, perhaps as much, if not more than any other, governments are looking to people like churches to get together, and they are making this kind of funding available to help us serve the community at this time. It's just worth saying that.
Sorry, Raj, I've had the impression that the attitude of the government towards applicants here is quite different to the attitude it might have had in other times, in that it's actually saying, we want to give this money, we want to pour this money into the economy, and can we do it through you? Which is not been the historic attitude of the tax department. Have I read that right or not?
If I may jump in on that.
Yeah.
Federally, that's very clearly the case. But at state and federal level, it is part of a how can you resolve the issue. So the funding one that Raj just mentioned for seniors, that's if you can make lives for people older than 65, and there's a special clause for Aboriginal people over 55 feel less isolated. So there's a delivery of a service to make things better. State and local are like that. Federal, a slightly different story.
You were just going to say something there, Raj, I think, though?
Yeah, I was. I've talked to a couple of different local mayors over the years, and I remember one of them said to me, Raj, why is it that churches think of themselves as not part of the community? We think churches are a prime part of the community, and next to or even greater than sporting clubs are at the forefront of serving our communities. And so we want churches to apply for the different grant schemes that are available. I just think it's worth putting in that perspective as by way of encouragement that people want us to step up to the plate at this time.
Now, we heard this announcement of the federal government's JobKeeper announcement from the Prime Minister a week or so ago, and then it went to Parliament on Wednesday, and then late Thursday night, Holy Thursday, the actual detail came out. And you guys, amongst the busy time of Easter, have spent time looking at the legislation, been messaging each other about different details. What can you tell us is the latest information about how we stand as churches on this JobKeeper front? We'll start with you, James.
Thank you, Dominic. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister said it was going to be a $1,500 payment if the turnover of your organisation has dropped 30%. That's then come back to 15% for people registered with the ACNC, which should be all the parishes and most other organisations, and that the money would flow in the first week of May. So it was a nice, simple pronouncement. There's been, I think, and Raj may correct me, 6 versions of the FAQ page in the last fortnight, plus the rules that were issued on Thursday. So there's little inconsistencies that we're working through, but we want to stay with the overall, if I can quote, the vibe of the thing, and talk about some of the detail in less detail. I'll also note again, this is being taped on Easter afternoon. Anything that happens after this, of course, isn't in here.
We've gone from 30% to 15%. Is it on? I mean, there was a bit of talk late last week that it was just going to apply to GST assessable income rather than collection plate or donation income. Where are we now?
There's 2 possibilities, and the fact sheet seems to indicate there's a choice. The Treasurer's regulations seem to indicate there isn't. So it'll be your GST reporting plus your plate revenue. Probably.
It's going to make a big difference for some of us.
The question we also haven't got a clear answer on is what time period we're looking at. If we want to get this happening before May, you would have thought it would be an earlier date. The rules seem to indicate it's a date of April or May. It indicated it was aligned with your GST reporting, but now may not be. So there's a few things we'll see some clarity in the first couple of days this week. The most recent fact sheet was posted, I think, 11 p.m. last night, Easter Saturday. So it's clear that our friends in Canberra are still in Canberra working pretty hard on this.
So what's the latest information you've got? I mean, I'm trying to work out whether or not my church can apply. Help me.
We believe you can apply, but there's a bit of question on timing. I might pass this to Raj. He's most recently been to this bit of the guts.
Yeah, look, I'm far more optimistic than James. The government, at a principled level, the government wants to pour a lot of money into our economy quickly. And the Prime Minister has explicitly said in the last couple of weeks, we need charities now more than ever. That's why they reduced the 30% test to 15% in the case of charities. And as I've read the legislation and the rules that have now come out, it seems pretty clear. That is, if a church has a reasonable expectation that its turnover, which includes donations or offertories, if that's going to decline by 15% compared to the same time last year, then you qualify for this package. So what that means is, I think it's probably normal, churches probably report their GST on a quarterly basis. So if your turnover, including your offertories or donations, is going to be 15% less in this quarter compared to the June quarter last year, then you qualify for this program. And I would expect most churches probably would. And then what that means is you get $1,500 per fortnight per worker, and that kicks in from kind of mid-April. The government's going to pay it every month in arrears, but we need to start paying that now, is essentially how it works. And I just think it's worth saying the government wants to keep charities and churches going. They want us to be able to focus on our main game of serving the community. I think it's a wonderful blessing from God. It doesn't remove a lot of the issues that COVID-19 are causing, but I think what it has the potential to do is people like me and those of us who lead churches don't need to have the energy involved in also dealing with a financial issue. We can keep ploughing ahead in working out how to proclaim Jesus at this time. I think it's a wonderful thing.
There may be some churches that clearly have had a 50% income level and they drop and they just clearly jump in. There are other churches where they're just going to be on the borderline of that 15% drop, or perhaps they haven't dropped 15% against last year, but they've dropped 15% on what they were expecting to in terms of budget, this year. Where do those churches stand?
The tests are pretty clear that it's not about what your budget was, it's not about what the prior quarter was. The test is a reasonable expectation of being 15% less than the same quarter last year. Now, some will do it monthly, in which case it's a month-on-month test compared to last year. Look, they're after estimates in good faith. Obviously, it would be unethical to manipulate things to produce an outcome. They're after good faith estimates, and the Commissioner has discretion to say, look, guys, you made that estimate, in good faith. Sure, you might have been 1% off or 2% off. That's okay. The point of what we're trying to do here is to put a lot of money into our economy, and in particular in the case of churches, we want to support them and enable them to keep functioning. So, so it's not about our budget, it's not about the first quarter, it's the same period last year. That's one of the clearest things in the whole package.
What have been the questions that different ministers have been ringing you and asking you about these last few days, James?
The big one is how much of the 1,500 we have to hand over. And the answer is all of it. So if you've got a church cleaner who is a part-timer, makes a couple of $100 a fortnight, they'll receive $1,500 a fortnight. If you have a choir master or a band leader or a music person who gets a couple of $100 a week, they'll be getting $1,500 a fortnight. The rules are there so you can ask them to do some more work, but you need to work in goodwill with them, because the idea is, as Raj has said, to get money out there so that things keep ticking over. So that's been a big one. There's one question that was bouncing was on parental leave, because somebody is on the books on 1 March but may have been off for several months. As long as they're not receiving the government parental leave, they should get the $1,500 a fortnight. Those people count. You also need just to ask on people's working visas, if they are from overseas. About the only group who get in are visa 444 people, which are our friends from New Zealand.
What about you, Raj? What questions have people been putting to you?
Yeah, look, I'm getting the kind of higher level, bigger questions. Are we going to qualify? What actually is revenue? I think we've talked about, are we going to qualify? I think we've talked a little bit about, what revenue is. How do we go about it, I think, is the other one. And it's just worth saying, Dominic, I want to encourage all churches at this point, if you have not already, to register for the updates on the ATL website for this program. Just Google JobKeeper program, and you'll find on the ATL website, you put in some basic information for your church, ABN and so on, and then you'll be on their mailing list. So when the program becomes one you can actually apply for, then you'll get an email that says you're going to do that. Now, I'm going to expect that's going to be coming out in the next few days, but you have to be on the updates to kind of get that. So look, they're the sort of high level, questions that I'm getting. There's others coming up, and I think James and I both talked about this. It's moving so quickly that we don't necessarily have all of the answers at this point in time. Dominic, you mentioned before, I'm a co-director at CMD. When we have all of the answers, and I said this to you yesterday, CMD, we're going to host some webinars to help people navigate it, but we're just going to wait until all of the details are kind of out there and the process is open so we can see exactly what it is, and we'll host some interactive webinars to help people.
Have you got a sense of what happens if you register for it? Because you've got to put in estimates on your giving, your income, and then what if it turns out to be that you only come in 10% lower than last year and you'd estimated that you were going to come in 20% lower than last year? Are you going to get some, is that going to be a big deal for a church?
The way the rules are all written, the commissioner has discretion in circumstances like that. And what they've said is, if it's a good faith estimate and you're a little bit off, that's going to be okay. It's subjective. They haven't specified if you're a long way off. But look, I just think churches now are not meeting. We're not having people on site. I would have thought almost every church is going to have a reasonable income drop in the vicinity that we're talking about to qualify.
So your bottom line is you think most churches should be applying for this?
Yep.
Absolutely. And look, the worst case scenario is if you apply and you do it and then you have no drop in income, well then you've got no drop in income and you pay back what you've got from the government. That's the worst case scenario, which is still pretty good.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today on The Pastor's Heart.
Good on you, Dominic. Love your work, brother.
My guests on The Pastor's Heart today, Raj Gupta and James Flavin, and Raj, of course, the Senior Minister of Toongabbie Anglican Church and also with the Centre for Ministry Development in Sydney. And James Flavin, he's now the Chair of the Sydney Anglican Church's Superannuation Board. You're with The Pastor's Heart. Now, Tuesday this week, we're going to bring you another edition. We're going to talk about what television professionals want senior ministers to know about presenting to camera. We're going to be talking to Paul Richards. He is the Communications and Outreach Director for the Australian Academy of Science, but for 10 years he was the senior producer of the Sunrise program. And we're also going to be talking to Evan Batten, who is a reporter for Channel 7, and both hearing their perspective on what senior ministers need to know about presenting to camera. That's Tuesday on The Pastor's Heart.